Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Hire, where we speak with incredible leaders about their unconventional journeys to success. I'm your host, Mike Thompson, and on today's show, we welcome Rishi Gupta, Head of International Digital and Technology with Taco Bell. Rishi's career path is incredible, from graduating from both UCLA and Duke, navigating his career as a new dad, and creating disruptive transformations, elevating one of our favorite fast food joints. I bet you didn't know he was also an accomplished dancer. We have a lot to cover, so let's hop in and meet Rishi. Okay, Rishi, let's start this at the beginning. Childhood. Paint me a picture. What did the house look like as a kid? Siblings? What did mom and dad do? Where
Yeah.
did you grow up? Paint me a picture of childhood for you.
I grew up in Orange County, California, specifically in Anaheim Hills, for anyone familiar with the area. My parents bought the house they still live in 3 months before I was born. So it's the same house. It's changed over the last 40 years, but it's essentially the same house from then. I grew up with an older sister. She's a little over 2 years older than me. And my dad growing up, he says he had other jobs. Obviously, as a baby, you don't know what your dad does, but from what I can remember, he had the same job until he retired slash passed away a couple of years ago. Was a machinist working for wow, the company's changed names so many times. I can't even remember the current name of it off the top of my head. But so that was my dad, very blue collar work, and then my mom had started off, I believe, in some type of accounting profession when I was little. Um, did a couple of different types of jobs, tried to start our own little small business here and there, but then finally retired working for the U.S. Post Service. She did that for about 20 years or so before she retired. So very much blue collar family. We worked in, grew up in Anaheim Hills. Um, you know, Predominantly it was an area that was growing. It's grown a lot since I've been there. I remember parts of where my friends live today, where my family even lives. Some of my extended family lives in the area where it's like fields and orange farms, and you can go buy boxes of oranges because they just picked them off the farm. And now it's a pretty well established community here in Orange County.
Very, very cool. So you and your sister, I mean, with your parents being more engineering focused, was there a big emphasis on school and grades, or were they really strict on you to kind of get good grades at school? Were you a good student?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I will say like the stereotypical Asian slash Indian parent, education, grades were always a big focus. Growing up, I was influenced by movies a bit. I'm like, I want to be that guy who wears a suit and carries a briefcase to work. I have no clue still what people had in those briefcases back then, since everything's changed and evolved since those days in terms of what we bring to work, what we do in the office, etc. But grades were a big emphasis. Obviously, coming from my family's background, a lot of my family, extended family on my dad's side, went to like get engineering degrees, like masters in that space. And so engineering was always a big push in general. Doctors, like I said, very stereotypical what you hear about, what out there. But in general, just getting a good education and getting the right education in their mind to set you up for a successful career in the future, whether it's a professional career or in like a medicine or law or something like that, or in another career that's very successful as well, was a big focus growing up. Elementary, junior high, middle, and high school was all about getting the right grades, getting into a good school, and then getting a good job after that.
So you mentioned kind of the vision you had in your head of wearing the suit, carrying the briefcase. Where did that come from? Like as a kid, who did you see that? Was it on a movie? Was it your parents? Was it
It was
somebody else
just
where you're like, I want it, I want that because so and so was that
it,
way?
it was just movies. I mean, when you watch a movie, at least in my recollection, it's like anyone successful outside of like doctors, right? Wore suits and had a briefcase and went to work. And I mean, most of it was probably filmed in like New York also. So it's probably all Wall Street people, but that I was watching in movies, but I can't remember. But yeah, that was a perception, right? And then kind of being, I guess, technically a millennial based on like the years they give you, and kind of entering college right around the bubble bursting. Engineering was definitely, and computer science was definitely a big push for my parents. I was always more inclined on the business side, but or doing something in business generally. but got a big push to go and do computer science in college for my parents.
Did that come, I mean, when you were in school kind of going up, were math and sciences
Yeah.
stronger for you than the arts? So that's kind of where you gravitated towards that? You were
I
definitely more inclined to the sciences and math?
I will say, even through college, for the most part, math was always a very easy to grasp subject for me. I think it got harder once you get into the theory of math. If you've never taken math theory classes, I will say that is definitely where math gets boring if you're not bored by math by then. And then science, same kind of concept. It's very analytical to some degree. And so I think where I always struggled with arts, and even now when I work cross functionally in my current role, and I always struggle with a little bit of that creative thinking side sometimes on how do you see stuff without necessarily understanding how you get from point A to point B.
Was your sister also strong in math and science as well? It was just kind of that was how you were brought up, the focus, the emphasis, so you put more of your attention there early on, or why do you think you both were gravitating more towards
Yeah,
sciences?
that's a good question. She was also, but I think she was a little bit stronger on the art side of it. But
Mhm.
it's just the push from my parents. I think even today when you talk about it, right? STEM was always a big push. Like you can get very good jobs, have a very lucrative career, being in a STEM major, going into a career that leads to. I think just now, recently, are we really understanding that actually having either one more well-rounded or even on the liberal arts side, you can be very successful and have strong careers if you really understand how to master your art, if you will, and how to really bring it to life in the world.
And you like where do you think that came from your parents pushing the sciences? Like did their parents were they the
Yeah.
same, or did you ever kind of tap into why they emphasize so much on the sciences and engineering?
I think a lot of it had to do with like my at least on my dad's side for sure. A lot of and my on my mom's side, a lot of my cousins had gone down the engineering route and been very successful, or were doctors and were very successful. So it's a very easy to see from the outside if you're not in it. How do you get the degree? What does the degree translate to, and what does that look like from a career perspective over your lifetime? I think it's a lot harder if you don't know anyone in it to do that same translation for some of the other kind of areas.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And extracurriculars outside of math and sciences and
Yeah,
being a good student, what did you enjoy doing as kind of an elementary, high school
yeah,
version of Rishi?
yeah. I've always loved sports. I mean, I still love sports. I think I was never very athletic. You probably can't tell from the video here, but something I've always loved doing. I played a lot of baseball growing up. I think it was the easiest thing for my parents to get me into outside of soccer. As I got a little older, I transitioned to playing basketball a lot more. I think that the nice thing with basketball is you need a hoop and a ball, and you can really play yourself. I think with baseball, it's a little harder to kind of do it with by yourself unless you have a lot of investment in equipment in your backyard, or you have the ability to go do stuff like that. So always love playing sports. I say those are the two sports I played a lot. I tried a little bit to get into football. I think there was a fear from my parents about me getting hurt playing the sport. I think in hindsight, I'm probably fine not having played it. But yeah, so I did a lot of sports growing up. You know, outside of sports, I volunteered when I was in high school a lot. I still, try to find times. I think it's a little hard now as my career's gotten busy. I'm expecting my first child actually in June. It's a little hard to volunteer as much as I want to. I found times here and there with little pockets, but definitely something I wish I could do a lot more is give back. But in high school, I think it was like one of those things. It's like school. I had time to volunteer. You do homework. You do a couple extracurricular activities, and it's a little easier sometimes with kids to manage your time as long as you don't lose it all playing TV or watching TV or playing video games.
Well, first of all, congratulations for headed for June, kind of first time parent. I mean, my son was also born in June. Jeff in the studio there, he's a new dad as well. So we're sending all of our support and good luck and enjoy the ride. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. But like huge
Yeah,
congrats to you. That's going to be
thank you.
a lot of fun.
Half of our nursery furniture is actually being delivered as we talk. Like my wife texted me right before this that they just showed up. I'm like, I am not available for the next bit, so I'll let you know when I'm done.
Amazing, amazing. Well, that's great. I'm happy for you and your wife. And in terms of going back to the volunteer work in high
Yeah.
school, were there certain causes or things that you gravitated towards volunteering, and why those ones? What was it about those causes that made you want
It
to
was
volunteer?
it was actually my biggest volunteer effort. We did some clubs on campus and we did things through that, but I think the biggest thing I did outside of like those clubs was volunteered at the local hospital. I think part of it was easy. I could actually walk to that hospital from my house, so transportation before I got a car wasn't as much of a challenge with both my parents working. And pre Uber days, having to get around wasn't as easy as you could do today. Even though I still find it a little creepy about to be a new dad, kids just get into a stranger's car and go places. Um, but yeah, it was the hospital was the easiest. I think I spent 3 or 4 of my years in high school volunteering at the hospital. It was great. After a little bit, it becomes like you kind of feel at a job. It becomes like your family. You love going in. I think I went in twice a week, if I remember correctly, for a couple hours each time. As a high school kid, not that we didn't get food at home, but as part of your volunteering, they let you eat in the cafeteria. And I get the stigma of hospital food, but it wasn't that bad. And I had some good friends volunteering with me, so it's just another excuse to hang out with friends and do some good while we were there.
Amazing. I mean, it's rare for kids in high school to get together and volunteer at a hospital. It must have been like that's unique. No, normally that's not what high school kids do. They're going playing video games or playing sports or doing things
Yeah,
that's rare. Like whose idea was it? And like did you ever look back and think like how did that come about? And like why did we
yeah.
do that? And why did we do it for so long?
Quite honestly, the hospital idea, I did what my sister did at that point. She
Mhm.
volunteered at the hospital, so I'm like, yeah, I could do that too. And then randomly, we ended up volunteering in different parts of the hospital, but the area I volunteered was uh, without talking to my friends about it. One of my friends and one of their friends who became my friend was volunteering with the same part of the hospital. So, and we ended up doing it at the same time. So we ended up forming a good bond and a good friendship through it.
That's amazing. And how did it make you feel giving back to the community at that time? Did it give you a sense of like joy, pride, those things at that age?
I will say like the work we were doing, it's hard to necessarily translate to the impact you're making. We were doing a lot of like back office stuff, helping them just kind of get stuff organized, get stuff put into their data, into their computers, etc. So in terms of like the tangible benefits, I don't necessarily see it. Like some of the stuff I
Mhm.
volunteered with post undergrad, and even in grad school, I would say it was a lot easier to see that immediate impact or understand the impact I was making. So the role I had, it wasn't as easy. Even my sister, when she volunteered, she worked in their gift shop. So it's just like, yeah, you're helping the hospital be functional and like knowing more about business. I'm not sure they needed volunteers to do some of this stuff, but you're in a place where people are probably suffering. So if you can bring joy, that's always a good thing.
And it set you up to value volunteering throughout your life, right? Like even though that moment
Yeah,
necessarily wasn't as impactful, it set you on the path to find joy in giving back to the communities. And even now, you even talked about how
yeah,
you want to do that. I don't know how you're going to have time being a new dad and the job you have, but like
yeah.
it's still a desire that you want to because of that
Yeah,
experience early on.
yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a bunch of ways you can give back to your community. Obviously, the easiest way with people with means is always to give cash, right, or money. But you don't necessarily see the return on that. I mean, there's certain things you can do to see it, but I've definitely gotten the most joy when I'm able to get out and interact with people and do stuff and see a tangible benefit, whether it's immediate or like you set up a big event, that event raises a bunch of money and then you can see the impact of that money. I think it's great. I mean, even something as silly as doing I forget what it's called, but it's like dance marathon or something. I did it finally in grad school where you literally are technically I think supposed to be dancing, but as long as you're like awake and standing the entire time, they don't say much. But you do it for like 24 hours and it helps raise money for when I did it at business school, it like helped raise money for the children's ward where at a hospital where these children are fighting like cancer and stuff like that. So it's money that was used to help those parents who are traveling from all over the world have accommodations while their children are going through something you hope your kids never go through yourself. And it's just, I didn't necessarily do anything to make their lives easier, but I could see the impact that what my one day of effort would have in the long run.
That's so cool. I mean, and I know you brushed over a 24-hour dance marathon, but I think is that a skill that you put on your resume that you have danced? Because I don't think anybody else or very few people would be able to claim that they had a 24-hour dance session.
Yeah, I guess some other things that I could put on my resume for about dance would probably shock you. I was also part of some dance teams when I was in undergrad. So something probably not as traditional you would imagine from an engineer by trade, as I like to say. Although no one lets me do any software coding anymore in my career.
So the dance in the undergrad, was that a passion of yours? Did you like
Yeah,
that and kind of found that as like an art form slash sport that you just like doing?
yeah, that's a great question. So I remember growing up, my sister would go to like ballet and all these other things, and my dad would always joke, "Do you want to go to dance?" And going back then and being a little bit stereotypical, like, no, 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 that's what girls do. Like, I'm not going to go do it. And then I think it was for my cousin's 16th birthday. In the Indian culture, like if you watch any Bollywood movie, it's more of a musical. And even when I ask my parents why they watch it, I haven't seen a lot, to be honest, so I can't tell you if it's true or not. Um, um, they would watch them for the dance and song sequences.
Mm.
And so in the Indian culture, you see a lot of people doing like Bollywood dancing at different big events, or what we call Bhangra dancing, which would be closest to like a American like hip hop dance style. And so I did it for the first time probably when I was 16. Actually, probably a little earlier. I can't remember how old I was, but for my cousin's wedding, and it was fun. Like it was a good time, and you just you go out, you have fun, you spend a lot of time practicing for a 5 minute performance. And I think that just kind of instilled a way to just get out and do something fun with a bunch of people. It was always most of it was with Indian songs and dance, which is funny because people would always ask me what songs I'm dancing to. I'm like, they play them. I know what the routine is and I know what to do. Couldn't tell you the names of any of the songs I really have ever danced to.
That's amazing. It sounds like, your sister seems to be a pretty big influence. I mean, the hospital volunteer was something you kind of got into because she was doing it. Dance
Yeah.
was something that she kind of exposed you to initially, and kind of you stuck to it. And like, that's
Yeah.
really cool. Like, do you have a good relationship? Are you and your sister fairly close?
Yeah. I mean, she lives a lot further away, but like
Mm.
I think family was always big for us growing up. Like I think, up until a certain age, our larger extended family, my dad's one of seven brothers and two sisters, and I think most of them lived in Southern California.
Uh-huh.
And so being an immigrant family, me and my sister were first generation. Um, like probably 2 weekends a month we would get huge family gatherings. I just thought it was normal, right? You grow up as a kid, you think whatever you do is what every family does. So I never understood the concept of a family reunion. I'm like, what is a family reunion? Um, and we would just get together. So like my extended family is a big part of like influencing shaping who I am. Like three of my cousins are all around the same age as me, and we started after we graduated college. Started doing trips every year because we're like we
Huh.
should hang out more and we should find a way to hang out more. So we started doing an annual trip to different places. It kind of slowed down as getting married and kids a bit, and then obviously with different life and world events happening, you can't do as many trips. But yeah, we still we would do it every year, and we try to find a reason now to at least get together. When I met my wife, we hosted our first annual cousins giving, so getting all the cousins over at our house,
Oh,
like a
cool.
friendsgiving but with family. And so how do you start doing things like that is a way to just stay connected with your family.
That's so cool. Your family ingrained this value of family and investing and making the time to bring the family together. And it seems like you're continuing that tradition on. That the cousins Thanksgiving is so cool.
Yeah.
How many people showed up to that dinner?
It was small again. It was just our the cousins that were like the same age. I think as we as we get older and realize that hey, like we need to like be more inclusive, we try to make sure like anyone that's around our age, we try to do a lot of stuff with and get closer and closer with. The nice thing is my wife has kind of been able to be added to the mix, and just like anyone else's significant other, everyone's been accepting. So like one of my other cousins would do like a white elephant annually, and so we would get about a dozen or so of us together with our families and do that every for the past couple of Christmases. So it's just a nice way to like
Very cool.
continue traditions we grew up kind of fell off as we started ourselves entering probably high school and college. So our parents found it harder to get like their family together, let alone the extended family. But as we're now getting our kids together, it's how do we bring them together and get that same experience that we got growing up.
How was the adjustment to college for you? I mean, did you move away from home? Was it close? Were there a lot of colleges that you were considering going to, and why ultimately did you
Yeah.
choose where you went to school?
Yeah. So I decided where I wanted to go to college in 1995 when UCLA won the men's national basketball championship. I had no clue
Oh.
about anything. Luckily, they were in LA. Luckily, they were a good school. Probably would have been a very different story if it was Arkansas. I'm not saying they're not a good school, but my parents didn't really want me to leave California, so probably would have been a harder conversation with them. But yeah, for me, my parents didn't want me to leave California, so kind of being in California, we're very blessed to have an amazing public school system here, right? The UC
Mhm.
system is one of the best in the world, if not the best, and then subsequently the Cal State system is not significantly worse than it. So we have a lot of awesome public schools. We have an amazing private school in Stanford, and then SC exists somewhere here too. And a lot of other great schools. So I think having spent some time on the East Coast, you get a lot of love for those Northeast schools that have a lot of history and tradition. But I think California has really done an amazing job on building a secondary education system that's really amazing for people who live here. So I did, I applied to UCs, which was easy. You make one application, you check as many check boxes as you want. And I did Stanford and USC as my applications. Most of my friends from back then know, but a lot of people that I probably work with now or know me after I went to college probably don't know this, but I actually didn't get into UCLA when I applied. So
Mm.
at that point, I was debating between USC and San Diego, UC San Diego. And USC had given me a half scholarship, but my parents being blue collar workers, I mean, I was going to take loads out anyways. But the cost to go to USC was still very expensive, and so I ended up deciding at that point to go to UCSD, and like my heart just wasn't into it. I think if
Mm.
I had chosen USC, this might have been different, but my heart just wasn't into it. And one of my really good friends at the time, whose birthday was actually yesterday at the time of this recording, obviously not at the time this is being shared, he had wanted to go to UCLA too, and he didn't get in, and he had appealed. And I'm like, you hear all these stories, no one ever gets in, this or that, and I'm just like, I had already like decided to go to UCSD, submitted it. I was like picking where I was going to live, all this fun stuff, and I just said, you know what? I'm just going to try to appeal to UCLA. I didn't tell anyone except for him to get his guidance on what he did. Wrote an appeal letter, submitted. Didn't even tell my parents, to be honest. And this is
Mm.
like, this luckily it only cost like 30 cents or whatever it costs to mail in something in the mail. So it's not like I had to go and have a big bank account to do this. Unfortunately, online applications weren't a thing then, um, and it's funny. I remember when I was applying. This was like right when online acceptances were a thing, and I'm like, I don't want to check online. I want the traditional opening the letter, etc. And so I sent it in. Didn't hear anything. You could try to track your status, and then I think I got an email saying, an email or something saying, hey, there was a decision on my appeal, and I'm like, well, I'm going to check online, and I got in. And then I remember telling my dad, I was like, hey, dad, I don't want to go to UCSD anymore. And he was so confused. He didn't know what I was talking about. Then I showed him the letter and he's like, okay, don't do anything until it comes in the mail. Like, this could be fake. It's just like adjusting technology. You don't know what these things are until you've like experienced them or truly have that kind of experience with technology. And so it was awesome. I got in, I drove up to drop off my acceptance and did all the fun stuff. But I mean, it was one of those things where unless I honestly got into Stanford, I knew if I had gotten into all my schools, UCLA was going to be my number one choice. So amazing
So
that I was able to make that happen.
a couple questions here. First of all, what did you write in the appeal letter that made them reconsider, and why didn't you want to tell your parents that you were appealing it, or tell anybody for that matter?
I It was just one of those things where I was already pretty devastated when I didn't get in because everyone knew that was my like number one school, and I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up. So
Right.
I was just like, if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Like I had really really good friends, still friends to this day, going to UCSD with me. So it wasn't like the end of the world by any means. But quite honestly, what did I write in the appeal letter? You made a mistake. Like I put in some numbers that said, "Hey, this should like these should have gotten me in. Like you made a mistake." And I showed it to my friends, and like you literally pretty much just said you made a mistake. I think the timing of the appeal happened to be in my favor as well. It was after all the kind of commitments were due, so the yield was probably lower than they expected, and so it ended up making life easier for me. I'm like justifying it. I'm gonna go with they made a mistake and realized it, and they let me in. But yeah, I wasn't a very insightful appeals letter to be honest, but it worked.
The thing is you leveraged your power as an engineer, science, math background and just stuck to the facts and said like these are the numbers. You made a mistake. This that must have felt so great to get that response back that you're in to say like I was right.
Oh
I was right. Like it's a bold move to call them out and say you're wrong. But when they agree with you, that must have made you feel pretty good.
yeah, it does, and it's funny. Like I mean, I'm sure my life would have been. Yeah, I openly admit my life would be 100% different if I went to UCSD, right? It's not like I would be less
Mhm.
successful or more successful. It's just different experiences, right? And as we talk about kind of my further career, one of the best piece of advice somebody gave me is don't focus so much on where you're going. And when I'm applying to business school, don't focus so much on where you want to go. Just enjoy the journey because you learn a lot more along the way. And I think, having to appeal, it gave me that understanding that, hey, doors aren't always shut, right? Think about different ways to get through that door or go around the door or do what's necessary to get to where you want to get to.
Such a great soundbite. I love that. And learning that at that age was great. I mean, this was before you started your career. You have that opportunity to stand up for yourself, bet on yourself, and kind of
Yep.
make an argument that you felt passionate about and were right. Like that's powerful. Maybe not
Yeah.
at the moment you didn't think that, but looking back, like that's what a great opportunity to happen as a high school going into college.
Yeah. No, it was great. I mean, obviously because I was later in getting in, my living situation was interesting when I went to UCLA, but it was awesome to be able to get in, to go through orientation, met amazing friends that I'm still friends with today during the orientation process. And it was a great start to my college career.
And computer science was the discipline that you went to school for. You had a double
I
major,
du-
right?
Yeah, I doubled. Like I said, I wanted to do economics. I think, like I said, my parents couldn't easily see how you go from economics slash business into a career that's successful. And their view was like, especially seeing people they knew, they're like, Indian people don't do business. I'm like, well, yes, they do, and it doesn't matter if they don't. But this was the compromise, and it's funny. People are like, why'd you choose computer science? I'm like, I liked computers. I had never programmed in my life prior to going to UCLA, and didn't know what it really meant, and I kind of just luckily was fairly decent at it until we get into the theory classes again. And so it was a good jumping point off into building a good foundation for me as I moved out of college.
And when you started college, did you still have that vision of wearing a suit, carrying the briefcase, or what did you think you were going to do for a
Yeah.
living after you got into UCLA?
So when I got into UCLA, I was like, computer science was my focus, and then economics was something I was doing more for me as like a passion project, if you will. Um, and I was like, oh yeah, I'll get an internship. I'll work as a programmer. And again, going back to what you see in like movies and these visions you create, it's like you sit in a cube and you just program all day, and you have like very little interaction with people. Having never worked professionally as a programmer, you don't realize kind of what all goes into writing code and building software. Um, but yeah, that was my initial thought probably for the first year or two is like, hey, I'm going to do this. And when I go to career fairs, I'm like, hey, like, how do I like? It was funny because like as a freshman, you'd think some companies would be more willing to like help you understand where you could be successful. And I'd go up to companies like, hey, like I'm interested in an internship. I'm double majoring. Like, is there a way I can leverage both sides of this? And people were always like, well, you got to pick which side you want to go
Mm.
on and this and that. And I'm like, okay, like it was always a bit deflating having being a double major and like getting that feedback. But really, I just kind of focused on, hey, I'll go program for a bit. At some point in the future, I want to get an MBA. Again, not knowing necessarily what an MBA would get me, but it was just one of those check boxes I wanted to be kind of further my business acumen. More so, probably to think about like, hey, as I'm programming, eventually I want to be into management and leadership. I probably need an MBA to get there. But yeah, that was my first couple of years was all about that, and then I started hitting theory of computer science classes, which I think there's just a trend with me in theory classes. I don't like theoretical stuff. I like seeing stuff in action and being able to touch and feel stuff.
So you always had a vision, even though you're in computer science, economics. You always saw I'm going to be in business, strategy, management, whatever that looked like. it was very
Yeah.
clear early on. They were like, I'm not going to be sitting in a cubicle coding. Like, I'm not going to be an engineer that's going to build something. I want to be on the business side of it. And that was something that was clear through
In the
those
long run,
experiences
yeah.
in the
In the
long run. Right.
Yeah, in the long run, that was my vision. I thought, the first few years I'll go code, I'll go get my MBA, and then I'll figure out what I do after that. But in the long run, it was like I do want to be like an executive or a leader in an organization as I continue to grow my career.
Amazing. So, did you do internships while you were in your undergrad that were coding, or did it expose you to skills or different environments to help you shape
Yeah.
what would be next after school?
Yeah, so I got a job on campus working with the law school doing IT support, and it was great. The law students there were phenomenal resources. They were always so nice and friendly. I think they knew I was an undergrad student, so they were like always willing to give me some advice and guidance. The number of people, it would shock you to hear the number of people in law school who say don't go to law school. Uh, I think but a few of them did suggest potentially doing patent law, right? Especially with a technical degree, you're able to really get a patent, pass the patent bar, and be a true patent lawyer growing up. And so I actually thought about it. I started getting some books to learn about taking the LSAT. Started kind of studying for the LSAT, and I did some research on what does a patent lawyer do. And people are like, oh yeah, it's great. You never go into court. I'm like, okay, so what do you do if you don't go into court? And then I'm like, you spend literally all day researching, and I'm like, that does not sound, and apologies to any patent lawyers listening out there, any lawyers who do this, but just researching all day just didn't sound exciting to me. And it goes back to like, at this point in time, I was like, shoot, I don't necessarily want to sit in a cubicle and code all day. I like being a little social. I like interacting with teams. I like participating on teams and doing things that way. And I think having spent some time at the law school where, yeah, you were kind of doing stuff on your own, but it was a larger team atmosphere I was in. I was like, I like this kind of feel. And so I was like, okay, what else can I do in this space? And then somebody kind of mentioned passing consulting. I was like, okay, I don't know what this consulting thing is, but I'll look into it. And then I ended up taking 5 years to graduate, and so trying to find an internship back then, between before you were a year out from graduating, was actually very difficult. Very few programs, and even today, very few programs do um, internships that aren't available for people graduating. So I got to a point where I would just work on campus at the law school all summer, and so I was getting into probably May, and UCLA goes till June, and between my fourth and fifth year, and I was about to do the same thing. I was literally walking to class, and I get a phone call from somebody at DirecTV where I had applied, and they literally asked me like two or three questions, and they're like, for summer internship, and they're like, okay, great, when can you start? And oh no, this was like 2 weeks before we were done with finals. I'm like, oh, I'm done with finals on so and so date, I can start the Monday after. Like, I was like, in college, I'm like, yeah, I want a paycheck, I'll come in and I'll work, right? And I still remember this, his follow-up question was, can you pass a drug test by then? And I said yes. And then I get into the work, I get into the job, and it was at DirecTV, and I was providing tier 2 production support for them, which is really, if you have an issue with your DirecTV account or anything, you'd call a help desk, and if they can't solve your problem, they would pass it on to the team I was on.
Mm,
And then I remember I was talking to my hiring manager at the time, who ended up hiring someone in between us, but essentially my boss, Zubin, he would be like, I remember telling me, yeah, essentially the person I hired never showed up. You were the third person I called. You spoke English. You sounded like a cool guy. And if it didn't work out, I was only stuck with you for 10 weeks. And I was like, I'm not going to sit here and argue with you because I'm here, but it's an interesting approach to bringing on an intern, and it went really well. I learned a lot from him. He was an ex Deloitte consultant. There was a lot of people on those teams that were ex Deloitte consultants,
mm.
and really educated me about the consulting organizations and kind of what that was. And I think that really helped me and set me up as I went back to campus and went through the recruiting cycle on how to find the job I wanted to do. And I was actually debating between that and investment banking
Okay,
as
good.
a potential career. Yeah. Quite honestly, I didn't get any real traction trying to get jobs with investment banking. Which is crazy because, going to business school, most people either do investment banking or consulting. They don't go investment banking, don't get it, and get a decent consulting job. I guess I was lucky in that regard where um, I was like, okay, this doesn't work. Let me focus my efforts in consulting. And I still remember to this day, I was like in bed. on a random day, and my roommate at the time, who was also looking for jobs in consulting, comes to me and he's like, "Dude, there's a Deloitte event. Let's go! Like, let's go to it." And I'm like, "I don't want to go." He's like, "Just get ready and let's go." And I'm so happy I did, because at that event, I impressed some of the right people. And I remember after the event, somebody I had known who was working there said, "Hey, just make sure you apply." Which, having been on the other side, I've learned that if they like you at these events, it like guarantees you the interview, and it really helps you kind of move forward in a good progression. So I interviewed at Deloitte. I got that job offer. I got a job offer at a couple other consulting companies, and then I was waiting on a job offer from Amgen when I had to decide between Deloitte and potentially Amgen. And I was actually kind of debating between the two. I had a couple good friends at Amgen at the time, one a couple good friends at Deloitte. So I'm like, I don't know where to go. And quite honestly, I was going to go with the offer that paid me the most. I had no clue about company culture. I think I've lucked in a bit to finding jobs and going to places where like some of the stuff I care about now actually existed when I got there.
Mm.
And I think part of it's luck, part of it is a bit of self-selecting. I think I performed better in the interviews where I felt closer and the culture resonated better with me. But I ended up deciding to go to Deloitte. And yeah, I accepted my offer and it was great. You accept your offer in like December, and you're cruising to graduate, and then you get to that point where you're about to graduate. It's funny. I remember I was in my last year, right around April, and UCLA makes this historic Final Four run for the first time since '95, and all my friends are like, "Let's go!" And I was like, "If they make the championship game, it's on Monday. I have a mandatory class on Tuesday that's here that I need to graduate. I cannot miss it." And I literally couldn't go to the finals, and I was so bummed. I don't even know if I could have afforded it, but I just couldn't even figure out how to make it work. And this was the year in the Sweet 16, and it shows you how much I love UCLA. I still remember where I was. It was the year we came back and beat Gonzaga, even though Gonzaga's beat us now 2 out of the last 3 years in the tournament, from a huge deficit. And I still remember where I was. I was like laying in tears on my buddy's couch, and all of a sudden we're coming back, and I'm like monopolizing the TV for that game. And the worst part about it is I had tickets to that game, and I had to give them to my friends because the next day I had a final I had to take,
Oh,
and I just couldn't, or a midterm or something, and I just couldn't miss it. So school got in the way of me attending some really epic UCLA moments in my last year of school, but ended up graduating and starting my career at Deloitte, and still had some awesome memories. I was actually watching the championship game at Poly Pavilion, and for like 2 seconds, they took a picture of me and posted it on the ESPN.com front page. I think they realized, they're like, "Who's this nobody? UCLA lost. Why is he up here?" And it came down 5 minutes later. I had a screenshot at one point, but I think I lost it as I moved, changed computers and stuff, or had some data loss. But it was an awesome journey. I loved every minute of my time at UCLA, and it's still to me the best school in the world.
seems like it. I love hearing the passion that and there's an energy when you talk about your time at UCLA that, I feel that it's, it was you wanted to go there so bad that you fought to get in there, and then it was
Yeah.
well worth it. Like you have this spot in your heart for UCLA, and I get that sense. And ultimately, like Deloitte kind of came out of that, and consulting was really, the seed was planted through your work with the law firm, and then that internship that just happened to kind of come through, ex Deloitte consultants there, like you understand what the world of consulting is like through people that work at Deloitte, so they're probably shaping what the culture is there. Then the event, so it's kind of serendipitous how it all kind of came together, and you landed at Deloitte. Definitely not how anybody draws it up, but like very
No.
cool looking back how it kind of happened and worked that way. So
Yeah,
um,
and it's funny. My buddy who really wanted to work at Deloitte, that was his number one. It was probably my number one from a consulting perspective of the companies that came to campus as well. He ended up not getting the job at Deloitte, but like I said, the advice somebody gave me is the journey, not the destination. He went to another consulting company, came in to Deloitte 2 years later. Through that, was able to actually accelerate his career a bit at Deloitte and learned a lot. And he's still there as a very successful partner at Deloitte today. And it just shows you it's not how you get, not when you get there, it's how you get there and how what you learn along the way.
yeah, to that point, when you landed at Deloitte and maybe through your first year, did you think that you would be a life in consulting and that partner track was something you get, or did you identify like, I don't know if this consulting life is for me long term. This is something I'm enjoy doing, but it's definitely not the long term.
Yeah, no, I thought I'd be there. So when I signed, they gave me like a signing bonus. You're there for 2 years. I'm like, I'm going to be here for 2 years, so I don't have to pay back any of the signing bonus. It wasn't a lot in the grand scheme of things, but as a poor college student, it was like $1 million essentially. I'm like, I'm gonna be here 2 years and I'm gonna leave. And I think what I've learned through my time at Deloitte is most people who came in and thought they'd be there forever left within a year or two just because they
Mm,
didn't understand. I think the people who thought they'd only be there a couple of years, not saying they didn't leave, right? I think a lot of people that stayed there long term who were people who thought they'd be 2 years really found themselves and were able to do a lot of amazing things and have stayed there for a long time. I still remember my start class was I think 10 people. So in the Orange County, LA office, we have
okay.
way bigger at Deloitte. And of us, there's one person who's there who's a very successful partner in the organization. The other not. Well, there's two actually. One's a very successful partner. The other one kind of went internal and did some other stuff along the way, and they're both very successful there. And the rest of us are successful in other parts, in other organizations. So it's a very interesting kind of trajectory people take from there.
It's also very cool that you're able to that class of 10 is still close and you kind of keep in touch. Which I mean, I'm sure it's not like you meet regularly, but you know each other and kind of it's part of the network that started
I
with.
think LinkedIn and Facebook have helped me see how successful people are. There's definitely, I mean, I had coffee with somebody in my start class 2 or 3 years ago. Despite everything, obviously Southern California, but we ended up living in the same neighborhood in
Mm.
Irvine, and so we get coffee every couple of months. So it's really cool.
So cool. So cool. So what was the moment when you're at Deloitte when you realized like I'm going to be moving on? Like did the opportunity come your way? Did you start looking? Like what was the moment that spurred I'm
Yeah,
going to be leaving?
That's a that's a good question. So, um, I I was like, I'm going to go to business school. It's going to be my way out. So Deloitte has a graduate school assistance program where if you apply, you get in. They give you some stuff up front, and then if you come back, you get business school paid for. I'm like, look, I'm going to apply to that. It's like a little safety net. I don't know what I want to do yet. It's always funny. People are like, I'll know what I want to do when I get to college, and then you get to consulting, and it's like somebody said it best. It's like college with a paycheck. You don't necessarily know what you want to do. You work really hard, but you enjoy life very well. It's that work hard, play hard mentality. We had an amazing time. Some very interesting stories in my trajectory at Deloitte, and some, things that probably you shouldn't do that I somehow got away with, and some stuff that you should do to be very successful long term. Um, but I was like, I'm gonna go to business school. Got accepted to the GSAP program. I'm like, I'm gonna start applying this and that. And then my first boss at Deloitte, still very good friends with him today, Rafiq. He left Deloitte and he went to a company, and then he was at Mattel. And he calls me. He's like, "Hey, do you want to come work for me at Mattel?" And I'm like, "Look, sure, but I'm going to business school in a year probably, and I don't know if that's okay with you." And he's like, "I need you to at least stay 2 years." And I was like, "Well, I'm going to go in a year, most likely, and so if that doesn't work, like, no big deal." And I could have gone, I could have like burned the bridge, but I was like, no need to do that. You don't really good friend. We still keep in touch really regularly. Um, he and so he was one of my recommenders. So I knew I couldn't
Mm.
like hide the fact that I was applying to business school. But so yeah, so I ended up staying at Deloitte. I applied to business school, applied to way more than any normal person should. I actually, again, didn't get in my first time to business school, and I was like, okay, what do I do? I was a bit later, and part of it was just trying to find time to study for the GMAT. It's one of those things where if you don't make the time, you don't get it. So anyone that I've met that wants to that wants to go to business school, I'm like, look, the best thing you can do is block off the date and book it. I studied on and off for 4 years because I never booked a date. And then finally, I went to my manager at the time and said, "I'm taking this test. It's going to be in 3 months. Tell me what day you want. I can take it where I'm not going to have to do it because I'm going to take the entire week off just to make sure I'm ready to take it on that Friday." It was great. Had some freakouts when I was studying, but took the test, went through the application process, applied to like 9 schools. Some of them I scrambled to try to get into round three, which is never a good idea, and didn't get anywhere. And I was like, devastated. And I was just like, I have really bad luck with getting into schools apparently. Um, and so I was like, what do I do? Do I reapply? I'm like a year away from getting promoted to manager at Deloitte, which again, very successful career. Got promoted. Not necessarily aggressively fast, but on a very strong, tight schedule. Like 2 years analyst, 2 years consultant, 2 year. was focused on a 2-year senior consultant to manager track, and so this is my after my first year senior consultant. I'm like, what do I do? Do I want to stay? Because if I leave, like AGSAP doesn't work after a manager, I'm also going to be a lot older than my peers. Like, am I going to get the return on this? Like, what am I getting out of going to graduate school? And so I was trying to figure that out. I'm like, let me regroup. Let me try this again. It was always my dream. Let me figure it out. And at the time, I remember my number one school I wanted to go with to was Dartmouth, Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth. Can't tell you what really drew me to it. It's isolated in the middle of nowhere, New Hampshire. Campus is gorgeous. I also didn't visit when it was really snowy, which could have changed my mind. But don't know what drew it. Didn't get into Dartmouth. Tried twice. Neither time they let me in. And a school that was never on my radar, to be honest, was Duke. And so I scrambled to apply round three, and I'm like, you know what? Let me go visit Duke in the second year. Let me figure it out. And it was great. I mean, the campus felt when I got there like home. And again, when I was applying to schools, I didn't think a lot about the culture. I didn't think about how they teach you. I didn't think about like what's the student's role in the community. These things didn't resonate to me. I pulled up like the U.S. News rankings, looked at the top 20 schools, and said, do I have a chance to get into these schools or not? And if I don't, then am I where you want to go? I think And the one thing I did know is I wanted to leave California. I'd grown up in Orange County and Los Angeles, lived at both between those two cities my entire life, or those two geographies my entire life, and I'm like, I need to experience life outside of
Mm.
California. And so that was like the one thing, and with the exception of I think I applied to Stanford. I'm like, well, if I get into Stanford, I'm going to go. But um, oh, both times they said, yeah, just keep looking for other schools. But so then I went. Second time around, a lot better success. Got into Duke, got into Cornell. Was at the time waitlisted at UVA, and of all the schools I've been through consulting. Luckily, I was traveling a lot for work, so I was able to visit all the schools at a reasonable cost, etc. And got a lot of support from Deloitte going through their GSAT program just to be able to go visit and really spend the time to do it right. Duke was the one campus that felt like home when I got there. They also lied to me a bit. They said you could play golf there 365. I was just getting into golf, but it does get cold. You can't play 365 days a year. It gets a little cold. But it's the one school that felt like home when I got there. The campus felt nice environment. It was a little bit more naturey than I expected and than I was used to from coming from Orange County in California. But the other nice thing is, Durham's an awesome small town. And it's one of those things where leaving California for the first time, not really having my support network I've had forever, it was something that really appealed to me when I decided to go. And it's funny when I left, my dad's like, "Why are you leaving your successful job?" Despite him wanting me to get a graduate degree, why are you leaving your job? I don't understand why you're doing this. Why are you going? But I was like, it's something I want to do. I went, and it was awesome. I mean, I'm literally Duke is still the, you know, I say it's the two best years of my life. I'm sure if my wife hears this, she'll be like, "What about when you met me?" And all this other stuff. But from a personal and career growth perspective, I think if I had to bubble it down, those 2 years allowed me to learn so much about myself professionally and personally that I wouldn't change for one. I tell everyone, I'm like, if you have the luxury to take 2 years away from work and do this, I highly recommend everyone do it. Are you going to get an ROI? I don't know, but it is so worth it in terms of just understanding who you are as a human being and what you want to do.
And what did you learn about yourself during those years? And was that the moment when you knew that you had to leave Deloitte and do something else? Like, what was it you learned about yourself for those 2 years?
I think I just learned a lot more about what motivates me. I think, previously it was always around like, I got paid well at Deloitte. Like I said, I took the job that paid the most. I think, I stopped worrying so much about compensation. And it was something I would say to people. I'm like, look, we're graduating here. We're making, even if you get like the lower end of the range people make coming out of business school and out of Duke specifically, I'm like, you're making a lot of money. And if you're not happy with that, are you really ever going to be happy with whatever money you make? Right. So, what other things will drive your happiness? Right. And I think some of the other stuff that I learned, it's like winning together is better than winning alone. So, how do we win as a group, as versus individuals? Right. It's this whole team Fuqua mentality, which um, you know, the students loved. I think everyone loved, and then it got to a point where I think some people got a little frustrated because I think it kind of blended what it really meant. But it was an awesome idea where like if one of us wins, we can all win if we do it in a cohesive manner and really build each other up. So how do we support each other? How do we be there for each other in a meaningful way to help us all be successful? And I think that's really what I've taken. It's like when I've come, I, spoiler, I went back to Deloitte after business school. We could talk about that in a sec, but it was like, how do I make sure that I'm only as successful as those around me? And I think when I think about managing my teams now, I think that's really instilled a lot of ways I think about it. Like I can take all the success, but I know I'm not successful without those people that really support me and do the work I ask them to do. And I make it a point to never ask people to do things I would never do myself. But I think that's how I've been so successful coming out of graduate school is really taking that understanding and not worrying so much about the pennies or the dollars here and there, knowing that if you do good for I always say if you do the right thing for your family, if you do the right thing for your company, all the other things you care about will take care of themselves in the long
Hmm.
run. Excuse me.
Very cool. It sounds like, I mean, there was you at such a young age and early in your career, you found, kind of your purpose and what you wanted out of your job, like, which is a phenomenal to have that gift so early on. Most people are still looking for that or never find it. And here you are, you found this. So fast forward, you go back to Deloitte, but did the job feel different when you got back there because of the experience at grad
Yeah.
school, or and ultimately that led to your decision to want to move on?
Yeah. So it's funny when I left Deloitte to go to business school, I was like, I'm not gonna come back. Again, I thought maybe I'll go try this investment banking thing. I sat through like a finance day. I was there for 5 minutes. I looked around. I'm like, this hasn't even started, and everyone in this room looks miserable. I am too old to be miserable. And I was about to leave, and they started, so I had to wait for the first session to be over. And then I went through the internship kind of recruiting process. I ended up getting an internship at American Express, which is hilarious because I actually wrote I wanted to intern at American Express on my
Hmm.
admissions application. Had probably the worst internship I could have ever had at American Express. Still love them as a company. Probably one of their loyalist customers they will ever have. I am the biggest proponent of using American Express cards. They do not pay me to say this, but I am a huge supporter of them. Um, but that internship was the worst internship I've ever had. I was at an intersection between digital and operations. And I remember I would have like meetings with our digital interns and our operations interns. And after every time I talked about what I did, what my internship was, at least half the group would come up to me and say, "You literally have the worst project out of any of the interns I've talked to." But learned a lot about the organization. Amazing. I just part of me was like, if this is what not being in consulting is like, it's miserable. You're stuck in a role you don't want to be in for who knows how long. I'm like, I don't know what I want to do in my life, so I'm going to go back to consulting and figure it out. The one thing I did know I wanted to do was really focus in on the financial services sector, specifically payments. And the thing that really drew me to payments was it was an amazing intersection, still is, of um, technology, finance, and business, and things I was really
Mm.
interested in. And it was really that how do you bring those three things to drive businesses forward? And if you think about any business today, excuse me, that's consumer facing, especially payments is a crux to that business. I mean, my business today, talk about payments is a crux to making sure we get the revenue we need to stay in business and drive innovation forward. And so I spend a lot of time in that space at Deloitte, and then I got to a point I was like, going up for promotion to senior manager again, extremely successful. And I was joking with our recruiter. I did a lot of campus recruiting. Another way I could give back at Deloitte was finding the next generation of talent at Deloitte, right? Like, so I spent a lot of time on campuses recruiting, making sure we were bringing in amazing talent for that firm to be successful for years. And it's still a place I hold close to my heart. I remember talking to the recruiter who I had a really good relationship with. She was like, "You're going to be an accidental partner here. You don't know what you want to do. You do a great job, and eventually you'll just be a partner here." And I'm like, "I know this is the challenge." And then when I was getting up promoted to senior manager, I'm like, if I don't leave in the next year or two, I'm gonna be a partner here, and then I'm really here for the next 10 to 12 years. And I'm like, I don't know
Mm.
if this is what I want to do for the rest of my career, right? You add 10 to 12 years on your career, you're like, am I really gonna leave consulting for the first time when I'm in my 50s and go do something very different? Maybe, but probably not. And so I was thinking about it, and then I still remember this, and I'm sure he's going to hate me if I say his name. But I was talking to one of the partners, there, amazing guy, Chris. I'll say his first name because there's a lot of Chris's in the world, and they may not know who I'm talking about. But I was having a conversation with him, and he said, all the numbers, all the data shows you've been here long enough. You're going to be here forever. Like, what do you want to do? And I remember that resident. I'm like, I'm not going to be here forever. Like, screw you, I'm leaving. I'm gonna go find another job. And then that's when I kind of took everything very seriously about how do I want to transition out of this. And Deloitte, like every amazing consulting firm, actually has several programs to help you transition out of consulting because the greatest thing about consulting is they understand is that people aren't going to stay there forever, right?
Right.
I think that's the best realization I've taken away from consulting is the one constant in life is change in your teams, change in your orgs. How do we react to change? How does the business change? And how do we need to adapt to drive the business forward? And so, they had these people that would help us find jobs. And I just started going down the path of like engaging them, figuring out what I want to do next. I remember I reached out to my first manager at Deloitte. So I remember he had called me when he went to Amgen. I was driving I was in New Mexico, driving back from business school. Like, you want to come work for me? I'm like, do you want to buy out my graduate school payments? And he's like, call me in a couple of years. And then fast forward, he came to Taco Bell and he messaged me. He's like, I know you don't want to work for me, but if you know anyone, I'm hiring. And that was like probably a year earlier. And so I'd reached out. I'm like, hey, I'm finally ready to find a new job. Like, do you know anything? And I think he didn't register for a second. So he had somebody reach out on his team to see if I wanted to come do a consulting engagement for them. And I'm like, no, I want to like leave. I want a new job. And so he called me and he really helped bring me into Taco Bell. And I've been here for almost 6 years since, and partly working with him. He's now moved on and is doing amazing things over at Wingstop. But he was a great mentor, great friend, and we did some amazing things, really driving some change here at Taco Bell from a technology perspective and how you embrace the brand. You know, we revolutionized our on-premise experience with bringing kiosks to all our restaurants. We're awesome program. We did a lot of cool things, and we won some awards, which is interesting. But it really brought me the fulfillment I think I was missing in consulting, where consulting is amazing. You do a lot of awesome, cool projects. You're usually at the cutting edge of stuff if you want to be, and you're working with some really big companies. Like when I returned, I actually spent 2.5 years consulting for American Express, oddly enough, as well as some other clients. But we did awesome stuff. But there was always a lack of this is my project. You always did stuff on behalf of your stakeholders. And I think with that kiosk project, I got that sense of this is mine. Like there
Mhm.
isn't there I'm not handing this off to anybody. This isn't anyone else. Like I was able to really like showcase what I was doing for the first time. And it was on top of that, I think the other interesting thing is, even at American Express, a lot of the financial service clients, despite being in payments, a lot of the stuff I did was B2B stuff or behind the scenes stuff people didn't see. It was like, people like, what do you do for your job? I'm like, have you been to a Taco Bell? Like, yeah. Like, have you ordered on those big iPads? These way people know what those are. Um, and they're like, yeah. I'm like, that was me. And they're like,
Hmm.
oh, and it's like easy to go to a restaurant point, or if I'm working on the mobile app, I can just open up the app and like, this is what I work on. And it's
Cool.
just having something tangible to talk about is so exciting in that space.
What was it that was it Chris that what did he
Yeah.
tell you about Taco Bell that made that resonated with like, oh, this
Oh,
is I want to work here. I want to work here.
it
Like what
was
was it
that
about
was that was Rafiq. And so
Rafik?
what it was funny because I was actually talking to one of my really good friends from business school, whose name is Chris, about he was going through this. Like I said, there's a million Chris's, and he was at Deloitte at the time too. So hopefully that Chris doesn't know who I'm talking about. Not that I said anything bad per se, but yeah, it's just if you think about food, like it's all hard now because coming out of the pandemic, I think people are used to delivery apps, mobile orders, curbside, all this other stuff. But I joined in 2017. Think about how you got your food in 2017. Uber Eats was just kind of a thing. DoorDash was
Mm,
just kind of a thing. Outside of New York, San Francisco, Grubhub, Seamless were just kind of a thing. And the fees were always super expensive. Like I wasn't a heavy app user really in 2016, 2017. Technology was greenfield in the restaurant space, and quite honestly, in my role today in international, it's still kind of greenfield. But it was, I'm not saying it's the last frontier, but it was one of the last industries to really be disrupted with technology. And COVID really put a accelerant on that disruption. But you're
yeah.
seeing, businesses evolve and transform, and you're seeing businesses kind of go away if they don't know how to. But it was that greenfield. And I think when I was talking to my buddy Chris, he's like, I've never heard you sound so excited about that open opportunity of really transforming that it's like a no brainer. And I was like, you're right. it has been, in the 6 years I've been here, I've had three very different jobs. I started really with digital transformation at our restaurants in the U.S. I helped stand up an engineering org here at Deloitte as we at Taco Bell as we transformed from a buy shop to a build shop for the U.S. business. And the last 3 years, I've had the privilege of leading our growth internationally from a technology perspective. We've doubled our footprint. We've become a very big growth lever within the larger Yum organization, and we're really about to show what Taco Bell brings to the rest of the world, which is an exciting place to be.
So cool hearing your role now and how, as I learn you about through your story, you've got the technology piece, you've got the finance piece, and you've got the business strategy piece in your role, which is kind of what you've been searching for. And to that point, the team aspect of being able to do things collectively together to achieve a goal and have that success. Now that you have this team and this group that's working towards that common goal, you kind of, as you put checking boxes, you've kind of checked all the boxes for in terms of up to this point in your career where you're at.
Yeah, it's great, and I think the interesting thing about working in a big franchisor is, having that consulting experience. Our franchisees are just like our clients and our partners, right? We're only, especially in a business that's like 99% franchise in the US, 100% outside, we're not successful unless they are. And I think them seeing that that's like really my mentality has been a great way for me to bridge a connection and build strong relationships with them, because the reality is, like, I'm not running the restaurants today, right? Like, no one in the building I sit in is running the restaurants today. It's them and their teams. And how do I give them what they need, from whether it's from a strategy perspective, a connection perspective, or the actual solution, to make sure that they're successful, not just today, but for the long run, because the longer we're all successful, the better off everyone's going to be.
I love it. I love your story. I do want to ask, when the March Madness comes, is it Duke or is it UCLA?
Nope. It's weird. So I'm wearing Duke socks today. Luckily, you can't see it, but it's 100% UCLA. Even when I was at Duke for one Halloween, I dressed up as Joe Bruin through a makeshift costume, which was amazing. I literally could go head to toe in UCLA gear, including UCLA cowboy boots that I don't think my wife has yet thrown out, but she's close to. So it's always going to be UCLA first, Duke second. I remember when Duke won the national championship a couple years ago, I posted something, and somebody I worked with at Deloitte, who's a UCLA alum, was like, "What the hell?" I'm like, "Look, UCLA didn't win. I'm also going to cheer for Duke." But I will say that was a big contention for me when I was applying to Duke. I'm like, "Can I cheer for Duke basketball?" But
Right.
it is definitely UCLA then Duke.
Amazing. And I'll leave you on this. There's always the final question is, you know, as people see you on LinkedIn and they look at your profile, what is one or two things that you want them to know about you that is not on your LinkedIn?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two biggest things is, one is like, you know, reading a LinkedIn profile, reading a resume doesn't tell you who the person is. I remember when I interview everyone, I'm like, look, their roles seem good. Let's chat with them. Let's understand who they are as a person, because, a lot of the stuff we do today is very learnable, very teachable. I didn't know anything about selling tacos until I joined here. I didn't know anything about kiosks till I joined here. And within 3 months, I understood our business extremely well. And I understood kiosks probably better than most in this industry. And it's all about how you learn and how motivated you are to learn. That's probably key. And I think that's me, right? I love learning. I think when I stop learning is when I need to find a new job, a new role, because I think our greatest asset is our brains, and how do we keep exercising that in some way, shape, or form. And then I think, don't be shy to ask for help, right? I'm always willing to help people within my network if they need something. I can't always do stuff. I feel like people see me as a potential big shot at Taco Bell, and they're like, "Oh, can you help me get this job?" I'm like, I don't know anything about this team or this or that, but I think you miss 100% of shots you don't take, right? So don't be afraid to ask for help if there's anything I can ever do.
Thanks so much for watching. If you liked today's episode, please follow along and hear more great stories from us. Make sure to follow Spark Recruiting on YouTube and LinkedIn. We'll see you next time.